priorities and its finances in a way that major project infrastructure can be funded as the economy starts to increase and government revenues rise from a bigger economy. But also, the public sector needs to have an open door to negotiation with the private sector on how infrastructure can best be developed. In Australia, we're going to need foreign investment as well to support some of our major infrastructure projects. That's been our experience in the last 20 years. We simply can't do all that lifting. So an environment in which foreign investment in major infrastructure projects is supported and encouraged is also important from a policy point of view.
Joe Kelly.
Joe Kelly from The Australian, Mr Anderson. I wanted to ask you about two elements of the new Fair Work legislation going through the Parliament. The amendment to the Modern Awards Objective directing the Commission to protect additional remuneration linked to penalty rates and the right of entry provisions. In your view, do you think it's important that the Coalition should explicitly campaign against these changes to win a mandate for their repeal should they win the September election? And secondly, Mr Abbott has said that the Coalition would make submissions to the Commission to back particular employer cases on issues relating to penalty rates. Is that approach sufficient in itself, and do you think it could be undermined by Labor's move to try and enshrine the protection of penalty rates in law?
Thanks, Joe. And what we saw last week with those two changes to our industrial relations laws, as well as a number of others, is an already unbalanced set of laws become even more unbalanced. The government said to the business community, after 3 or 4 years of operation of these laws, we'll have a review and we'll consider the outcome of that review to see whether some of your concerns can be addressed. The review was held in 2012. In good faith, the business community participated in the review. What came out of it were some recommendations to fix some of the problems. Nowhere near as significantly as we think they should be fixed, but there were some recommendations to fix some problems. What has the government done in the last 6 months? It's completely put that review recommendation to one side and loaded up another trade union wish list of changes to the Fair Work laws, which make an unbalanced set of laws even worse. I said in my remarks the business community is frustrated. And I think my answer to this question illustrates why that frustration is at boiling point. It's because the business community has not been properly respected in that process. On two of the specific issues that you raised, the changes to right of entry and the government's change to the law in respect to penalty rates, both of those changes are not sensible. We have not got a problem with unions having inadequate access to workplaces on right of entry. We've actually got a problem the other way, where some trade union officials have misused existing right of entry powers and have inundated workplaces with excessive right of entry notices and rights under existing laws, allowing trade union officials to march into lunchrooms while people are trying to eat their lunch instead of governing right of entry in an orderly way is completely overreach. And I am very disappointed that last week the Australian Parliament demonstrated its dysfunction. We had the completely unacceptable situation last week where on Tuesday those that hold the balance of power in the Australian Parliament said they would not allow further industrial relations changes through the House of Representatives unless both major parties supported the changes. By week's end, by Thursday 5 o'clock last week, we had a change to well-established Australian law on trade union right of entry that did not have bipartisan support from both political parties, but it got through the House of Representatives. Now, I'm not interested in pointing fingers at who was to blame for being there or not being there for a vote, or calling a vote or not calling a vote, or calling a vote on the voices or not. Small businesses and the business community is not interested in just finger-pointing about these matters. What we know is that the law of Australia is being changed in a way that not even the Parliament last Tuesday said it would be changed. And that is a wholly unacceptable situation, and it illustrates the dysfunction of the Parliament. On the issue of penalty rates, penalty rates in Australia have been established by our independent Industrial Relations Tribunal for many years. They are a contested issue between private sector employers, especially in the service industries, and the trade unions that represent workers in those private sector industries. And that's the way it should be. These matters should be dealt with as a contest between people in the private sector who have one view or the other, and an independent determination should be made by the Industrial Tribunal about the level of penalty rates. What last week the Gillard government did, in a way not even recommended by its independent review, was to say they are going to enter that space and become a barracker in something which is an issue between the private sector and which its industrial tribunals are perfectly capable of dealing with. And they have now changed Australia's law to build into the law principles which compromise the ability of the private sector and small business employers to have their day in court and have their case heard on the merits without a skewed set of rules having to govern the discretion of the tribunal. That is completely unacceptable. You will gather from my answer, again, why employers are frustrated, why the small business people of Australia feel let down at that level of barracking and partisanship. There's no doubt that penalty rates in some parts of Australian industry are at excessive levels. The fact that, even as recently as this Easter, businesses in tourist areas of our country were having to close and unable to service their customers because of prohibitive penalty rates which were so excessive that they actually prevented free enterprise from trading, should tell us all that the system is out of whack. Something is out of kilter, and it needs to be put back in whack. And the government promised, when it made its new awards, that these penalty rates wouldn't go up. And we found that promise trashed in the first 3 years of the government when it came to power in 2007. And those penalty rate rises are increasing. From the 1st of July this year, another load go up. So business is deeply concerned about this issue. We don't expect the government of the day, whether it's Coalition or Labor, to have exactly the view of the business community on the question. But what we do expect the government of the day is, at a minimum, to support arrangements which will not interfere with the rights of businesses to trade, to employ and to serve customers, and certainly not interfere with the discretions that are held by industrial tribunals to decide those issues on their merit.
A question now from Peter Martin.
Good day, Peter Martin, Fairfax Media. Peter, on the right of entry, you've just said then under existing law, unionists can march into lunchrooms, hold discussions without permission of owners. Where would you like to draw the line?
No, let me be clear so there's no misunderstanding here. Under existing laws, right of entry rules allow unions to come into workplaces in an organised way with appropriate accreditation and permits, and a business must make available a room and a facility for that union official to speak to those workers of the business that want to speak to the union about union-related business. That's the current arrangement.
And is that where you draw the line? Are you happy with that, or would you draw the line somewhere before that?
By and large, that system works. By and large, that system is the way the right of entry rules have operated. What you need to do with that existing system is make sure those abuses of those systems are able to be dealt with. So the principles of the current system on right of entry were fine. Dealing with some of the abuses and the union officials who were entering and have been entering workplaces on more than 100 occasions, over the course of a year, in order to effectively try and drum up some difficulties and some strife, well, those are abuses, and there's existing processes to deal with that. But we will not accept a proposition where a private workplace and lunchroom becomes the domain of a trade union official exercising a right of entry power that's conferred by the parliaments of Australia. That is an interference in both individual space and individual rights as well as private property that goes too far.
Sorry, Peter, didn't mean to cut you off there. Michael Keating.
Michael Keating, Keating Media, Mr. Anderson. Industry assistance is shrinking according to the Productivity Commission, and certain sectors are receiving a disproportionate share. How would you like to see industry assistance restructured to better help Australian business?
Thank you, Michael. The most significant thing that an Australian government can do to assist industry is to make sure that the regulatory and policy framework and the economic management of the country is conducive to a strong and growing and competitive industry. That's actually the basic principle. The basic principle is not about whether government should put money or invest money into a particular industry. The first principle is for government to do what is within its responsibility, its regulatory responsibility, to make sure that industry in Australia is best positioned to compete. And when you have tax laws or industrial laws or a range of government projects which work against that, then we have to address those problems. There is a role for government to do some extra work with particular industry sectors. But in all circumstances, industry assistance needs to be based on the principle that it needs to be net value adding to the Australian taxpayer. Simply putting money into businesses which are not capable of standing up on their own 2 feet is ultimately going to be a dead-end game.
And a final question today from David Spears.
David Spears from Sky News. Peter, I know you're wearing a blue tie today. And
I had a look, David. I think it's grey. But anyway.
somewhat blue. In that vein, I thought I'd ask you about the story of the day, which is all about gender wars, gender politics, sexism. As a leading business advocate, do you think we have a problem with sexism in Australia, sexism in business in particular, and gender equality?
David, thank you very much. The tie is a charcoal grey, given to me by my beautiful daughter Emily. In Australia, no, I don't think we do have a problem with sexism, certainly not in a structural way at all. I'm very disappointed that we look like continuing a political debate in the lead up to the election, which focuses so heavily on personality, which focuses so heavily on one politician or one political leader scoring points of another politician or another political leader. That is what frustrates the business community deeply, and I believe it frustrates the Australian community deeply. What we want our political leaders to do is to focus on the core issues that are going to support a stronger Australia, and a debate about the gender wars where there's no structural problem with gender issues in Australia and where much more can and needs to be done on a bipartisan basis to try and increase women's participation in our workforce, for example, is well accepted across the political divide. I don't see any merit in us going down the path of a gender war in the lead up to this election. I see all merit in our political leaders focusing on the issues that matter to the Australian people and the Australian business people, because their interests are too big to be ignored.
If you please thank our speaker. Peter Anderson, thank you very much for today's address. Obviously, the level of support in this room for you from the small business community is just, if you like, one indication of what I assume is a significant level of support for your campaign around the country. So we plan to watch that campaign very closely, not just until the next election, but beyond it, as you said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.